Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic that helps us have better conversations with ourselves and with other people. I'm your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and it is my absolute honor. I was going to say, I'm fangirling a bit. I'm so excited. We've been waiting for this conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest, Neha Sampat. Neha is Esquire. I need to give you the full, all of your earnings. Is the CEO and founder of BelongLab, where she helps organizations create cultures of belonging into which each individual can bring more of their true and best self. Through consulting, training, speaking, and writing, she helps organizations create peak performance, inclusive teams by addressing hidden barriers to belonging, such as internalized bias, unconscious bias, distrust in teams, and wellness challenges. She's an internationally sought-after expert on inclusive leadership and disrupting imposter syndrome, which we'll be exploring today. And she runs the top-rated Owning Your Value programs to cultivate evidence-based confidence and nurture authenticity. We will put the rest of her bio so you can learn all about her. But Neha, welcome to the show.
Oh, Sarah, I am relaxed. You can see me relaxing into my chair. I just love spending time with you, and I have been looking forward to this, and it's even better than I imagined. Just being in your presence and getting to dig in, it's going to be a lot of fun.
My cheeks hurt. People who are listening to this, you can't see it, but my face is red and my cheeks hurt because I'm smiling so hard. So I'm going to have to massage. But I think we should start with how we met, because I think that it's a really beautiful love story. It's not beautiful.
It is.
It's a lovely love story. Neha and I met, and I can't remember if I was already connected with you or that was literally our first. I think it might have been one of our.
I think it was our first interaction. But yes. I know that I probably was already following you. Well, that's how I saw.
Yeah, we were connected.
Yeah, we were connected on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, and I posted what was something that I've shared before, of this idea that you don't get to control who trusts you. I forget what the exact language was. And or you don't get to decide, right, if you're trustworthy or not. Other people do. And you pushed back and offered an expansion on that I hadn't offered, which was, and when you're a systemically marginalized person, trustworthiness often isn't given to you. And I remember, sometimes with social media content, you're like, okay, let's just pull from this and we'll post it, and we'll share it, and we know that it's resonated with people. But when you responded and pushed it back, I remember just looking at my phone going, damn, that this felt like an insignificant thing to share, and suddenly you made it even more significant in a way that I hadn't considered, and sat with it, processed it. Nick and I ended up having lots of conversations about that, and that's where we started, was your willingness to push me in my language and my perspective to consider broader than what I was considering, and I was so grateful for you for doing that, and that's how we met.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's more to that story, right? For me, I found so much, oh gosh, I don't even know what the word is. Honestly, some of it was a sense of relief. And some of it was reassurance. And some of it was, honestly, being valued in how you responded to my expanding, right? Essentially what I did was say, actually, I have a different perspective. Let me share with you a perspective from my marginalization and from many other people's, multiple marginalizations. And that is a scary thing to put out into the world, because that isn't always welcome. And in fact, it's often unwelcome. I've done a similar thing, as I mentioned to you when we finally actually got on the phone and talked. I've done a similar thing to other people's tweets, and I'm not going after them to be like, how dare you? It's more just like, hey, you know what? Actually, let me share with you a different perspective. And I have had people block me on Twitter for just sharing a marginalized perspective, which is deeply injurious because it's personally taxing, right? To actually like put out that perspective that is often silenced in our society. So you were so open. You were so welcoming. It wasn't even open. It was like welcoming of my perspective, and you valued my perspective, and you let me know that, and you publicly exclaimed that. And it moved me. It moved me. I was like, all right, I already followed you. I already kind of loved what I had a feeling I liked you, but that really
I'm glad I
solidified
didn't.
it. Yeah, you really
No,
solidified it. And it was moving for me, not just because of that. It was like, okay, it's worth it to speak up, right? Because sometimes it feels like it isn't.
sure. Well, and when I say sure, and that I didn't realize until we talked how much of an act of courage that was for you, because for me it was like, oh, that's a really good point. And then I went into reflection mode, and I hadn't realized until we had spoken, which makes me, again, just another way that you've expanded my thinking of just realizing that when somebody pushes you, especially when we're talking about anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and that the norm is not to be curious and considerate, or to say, hey, this is, it's tapping into my big passion, which is, we need to be curious, not when it's easy and comfortable, but when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yes.
Because when I saw that, my first, and we'll be talking about doubt, was like, oh shit, like I hadn't even, and then was like, okay, like now I know, and now I can start thinking about that even more. And also, like, what a powerful example of what's possible when we're
Yes.
willing to be courageous with each other and to be open to it. And it sort of, it felt like an instant bond for me,
Yeah.
because you didn't know how I would react, but I appreciated. I was like, I appreciated the pushback. And to me, having people who aren't afraid to say, hey, I actually disagree, or I have a different perspective, is such a big indicator for me of, oh, we can have real conversations. I actually have a deeper level of trust with you because I know we can navigate this together. And so it was so powerful to experience that. And in full transparency for people who are listening, this is only our second conversation of actually talking to each other. We've had a lot of interactions on social media and tagging and talking and, texting. But there's an intimacy now that I think was born out of that moment. And I'm so grateful that you did that.
It's so magical that everything you just said about the meaning of that interaction and the impact of it rings true to me from the other side of the interaction, right? Like it completely, yes, ditto, 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 plus one, right? I remember our first phone conversation after that, and there was a freedom I felt that I'm not often consciously aware of, that I don't carry around in most conversations, right? Like, I knew that I was speaking with someone who was very open and welcoming to my true self and my true perspective, even if, it may be uncomfortable for her. And that, it was like I had space. It was literally like I felt space. And in feeling that space, I recognized how the sad part of it is I recognized how boxed in I often am as I walk through this world, because it's not how I feel around everybody and in every interaction.
Yeah. It's the word that was coming up for me was disarmed, because like I felt very disarmed. And, boy, this whole show is about how do we have conversations how do we have better conversations with ourselves and other people. And, while we know there's a path we want to go today, I think that it's a linchpin moment for me, right? From the standpoint of on multiple levels that are essentially like forever burned into my heart, not only with you, but just in how to continue to show up in that way. And also, hearing you talk about just like that feeling of boxed in and how little we all are craving, I feel like that deeper level of connection, to be really seen and to be really heard and to feel valued. And I appreciate your language of welcoming, There was something
Mhm.
as you were talking that landed differently for me from the standpoint of there's something different, and maybe you can tease this out with me, of being open versus being welcoming is what was, as you were
Yeah.
using because I don't know, there was just something about that using the word welcoming, even for me, was like, oh, where else, how else can I be welcoming and not just open? And also, in what situations do I feel welcomed? And so I'm curious, how would you, because we were talking about,
Yeah.
like, how do we even start to dissect, like, the difference of inclusion versus belonging? And this feels like a beautiful pathway in of being open isn't the same as being welcoming.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, we're already there. We're already like, my mind is already blown. How do I even respond to that? I don't know. I mean, let's try to figure this out. I mean, one thing I do think it's different. And that's why I found
Mm,
those words coming out of my mouth, that it wasn't just a feeling of knowing that you were open. It was feeling like you were welcoming me. I think there's something possibly about centering.
mm,
Like, I think about when we welcome a guest into our home and how we care for them with there's an assumption of caring. There are gestures of tender caring. And I think that's different than openness. Kind of feels like this is my space. The door is open. Whereas
mm,
welcoming is like, hey, come into my space. I want to understand you, and I want you to feel like this is your space.
mm.
Does that make sense?
No,
Because I just
it
blurted
totally
that out.
does.
I don't even
It's
know.
so
I'm like
brilliant.
thinking out loud.
It's no, there's an assumption of caring.
Yeah.
There's an assumption of, and also, as you were talking, it made me think about, and there's an intentionality.
Yeah.
There's a real intentionality with not just good intentions. So when I say intentionality, I'm not saying good intentions, but there's real intentional action that's taken to say, hey, come into this space, and I want you to feel good, and I want you to feel comfortable, and I want you to be you. And that I go back to your phrase, that assumption of caring, and I feel like, and I'm sure you see this in your work too, that sometimes I feel like I don't know how to get you to care for just to care for the people. Like, and I mean that on a very human level, not just from a productivity perspective, from an output perspective, from a deep caring. And what would it look like if we thought about creating cultures, and personal or professional for that matter, that were truly, truly welcoming?
Yeah. I mean, I want to come back to that, but I just like that thing you said about intentionality is really striking me, because I almost feel that as a sense of, instead of like, hey, come in if you want, which is like
Mm,
openness, to
hmm,
like, I want you to come in. I want to
mm.
know you. Um, so that word intentionality really hit at the core of it for me. And then as far as like, how do we bring that caring in? I don't know that I have an answer so much as I have a concern that we are tapped the F out. Like, we're all so tapped out. We are emotionally tapped out. And honestly, like, that worries me, because I understand why we're all tapped out, but I wonder what that means with regard to how much buffer do we have to care
Mm.
about other people, about what's happening around us. It's just, we're in a different place than we were, February 20. Let me just speak to the people in the United States, because it was different in February 2020 for other parts of the world. But in the US in February 2020, I think we didn't realize it, but our capacity for caring, perhaps, the energy we had was different. I don't know. What do you think? Because that,
I I feel like in the work, uh, it's interesting to unpack this a bit. When I think about that capacity for caring, especially I'm thinking in the workplace, but I think it could apply to lots. I I think there we were constrained already
Yeah.
from the perspective of there's such a sense of urgency. There's such a sense of, perfectionism. There's so many fires we're putting out. There's so much that we're moving so quickly in. And so coming into a time when we all got depleted and are still depleted, and I'll share with you one of the concepts that has been really resonant for us personally, and when we're working with people, comes from the work of Dr. Bruce Perry from a trauma perspective of we all have a baseline of sort of like our normal stress response. And when it increases, and then ideally we come back down to the baseline. But often if we just keep ramping up, like our baseline shifts. And we had somebody recently who was like, I don't even know if that baseline exists anymore.
Oh,
I don't know if I don't even know if I
yeah.
can find that person anymore. And that has huge implications, as you've connected and pointed out, to our ability to care, our ability to show up, our ability, because, when I think, and then the question that's coming up for me is, what does it mean to care? What does that look
Yeah.
like? That, that it isn't just, it's holding space. It's navigating the tough stuff. It's being really intentional about how we show up. And when we're already operating from empty in a culture, especially from a U.S. work culture of just hustle, 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 and we,
Yeah.
like we're working at our seams basically constantly.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that there's a lot of erosion of relationships and
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes so much sense to me. And I totally agree with you that we were already at a place of being depleted before. Um, and I think it just, as we move into Mental Health Awareness Month, I just, again, like see the dots connecting
Mm,
with our mental health and how that becomes a bigger priority, not just for ourselves, which should be enough, right? Like we're allowed to care about ourselves, but also to allow us to not be at the bottom of our barrels, right?
mm,
To fill up those barrels so we can then actually care more about other people and other things that in our hearts we do care about, but we just don't have the energy to kind of express that caring perhaps. So, self-care isn't just for the self, according to
mm.
how you and I have just connected the dots.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. Well, and so let's, I do want to shift a little bit, but it's all connected, from the standpoint of the cost of that,
Yeah.
the cost of not having spaces that are welcoming, the cost of, and knowing that we have a lot of our audiences either in the HR space or in the leadership space. I want to take a moment and just hear from you how you define the difference between inclusion versus belonging, which maybe like ties into the being open versus like the invitation versus the welcoming. And so I just to ground us in that as we think about how do we truly create spaces where we can be our best selves, we can be our whole selves, we can hopefully be in a place where we're not being depleted or, gosh, worse yet, harmed,
Yeah,
which we know
exactly.
happens.
Yeah. So, I think that if you're actually moving towards belonging and creating a culture workplace where people feel like they belong, you will by definition be being more inclusive. So
Mm,
um, the trouble I have with the term inclusion isn't really the term, it's more about how it tends to be practiced. And it tends to be practiced in a very top down way, with organizations being like, hey, we're doing programs A, B, and C to be inclusive. Yay on us. And meanwhile, the people in the organization are like, well, that's great. You're solving problems A, B, and C, but those aren't my problems. My problems are X, Y, and Z. You never
mm,
bothered to ask me what my problems are. So how inclusion tends to be practiced bothers me because
mm,
that's where we see that disconnect between what an organization is doing and are they actually having success in truly being more inclusive. So belonging allows for valuing the subjective. It's about valuing as data each person's lived experience. So belonging requires you not to assume what it's going to take for you, Sarah, to feel like you belong with me, but to actually ask you, Sarah, tell me about a time you experienced belonging. Tell me about a time you felt like you didn't belong. I start to then exercise that curiosity that you talk about a lot, and understand who you are and understand what I need to do to
Mm,
help you feel like you belong. And so that's more of a bottom up approach. So I always
mm,
say, right, like you actually have to define the pain points from the bottom up. You have to actually address the pain points from the top down. That defining the pain points from the bottom up, that's a belonging approach. If you are going to do that, you are going to actually achieve inclusion. Isn't something that's achievable. It's something you're always working on, but you will
right.
be on the path to inclusion. But I think part of what we struggle with is really this idea that we have to have social science studies that validate the ways we're going about inclusion. And I have a degree in sociology. Like I love social science studies, but let's be honest, there's tremendous bias in what studies are actually conducted, who is conducting those
Mm,
studies, which papers are published. So there's this whole dearth of research on areas that are actually really important to marginalized people. And so it's even more imperative that we not just say, hey, we're only going to do what the studies tell us to do, and we don't need to talk to anybody. Let's just look at the studies and do this top down. It's more imperative that we say, I'm going to actually do a study in my organization and understand what is happening with the people in this organization. What are their experiences? What are their needs?
mm. Hearing you talk about that, one of the things that was coming up for me was sort of this idea of when it's always approached from a top down is there's still so much gatekeeping and parameters put on that from the standpoint of we're gonna hire more diverse, right? That's always the place that people jump to, like, well, we're just gonna recruit, we're gonna hire more, and then okay, great, well, that, I mean, there's lots of issues with that. but uh but then it's like, look what we did. We brought them into the first
Yeah.
level.
And then they
Like,
leave after a
and
year,
then they
right?
leave, and then we don't promote them, and we don't invite them to be part of important
Yeah.
conversations, and we don't.
Yeah.
And I love that language of the pain points have to be identified bottom up, and
Yep.
then the changes have to happen top down. I haven't heard it, sometimes you hear it, it's like, oh, I haven't heard it phrased that way. And it's so important and so powerful, because again, like, sometimes that's just not happening. The other thing that was coming up for me too is in hearing you talk about, because you were singing to my heart, when it's like, what do you like, when do you feel include, like, when have you felt like you belonged somewhere, and even just using that word, because sometimes I think there's this over tendency to want to simplify the complexity of humans, right? That's like,
Yeah.
look, we're all going to take an assessment. I know you're a red, so this is what you need, and I'm going to show up in this way. Instead of, I'm always like, you don't need an assessment. If you just paid attention and asked questions and
Oh,
listened, you can
yes.
learn everything that you need about. And not only that, but holy gosh, the act of asking and listening and wanting to know that information, guess what? That's going to make that person feel way safer. And you're going to build that deeper level of trust
Yeah.
in the act of even just exploring. I hadn't made that connection before as I'm saying this out loud, but it's like, oh, we're going to take this assessment to build trust. Actually, just the act of having a conversation about needs and about all, and
Yeah.
meeting those needs and adjusting to it. And
I am like you are another blowing my mind moment because yeah, I mean I think this is tied to capitalism and how we package and try to sell. We're gonna go there. We're gonna go there.
oh my gosh, let's
How
go
we try
there.
to
I'm
package it, right? And
here.
this bugs me because those assessments,
Oh,
and
man,
trust me, I
I've
use those. I'm
never made that
certified, and
connection.
I know,
Yeah,
right?
me
I
too.
I'm so right where we use those as tools, and I don't think it's to say they're bad tools to use. I think we have to be strategic about how we use them and recognize the limits of them because
Mm,
I know for a fact these are not tested on like like with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
mm,
When you're testing my personality, and you're testing it based on like white American standards,
mm,
you're going to see me as something different than I really am because I'm going to get these like strange scores that are sub norm and I will perceive as being suboptimal, and probably the people around me will be perceive as being suboptimal, and we start to shove people into categories
mm,
and say this is good, this is bad, this is how you could be better. And I don't know, there's so much I feel that I can't quite articulate, but this recentering of our humanity that you
mm,
just expressed, this idea that it's as simple as a conversation, like a heart-to-heart conversation. That is it for me. That is like the light bulbs all around it
It's so
thing.
simple, but it's not easy, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
then like you add the complexity. We just interviewed somebody who I'm excited for you to hear, where we talked about men and intimacy and
Oh
how that
yeah. Yeah.
vulnerability and that front to front kind of conversations is incredibly difficult and generalizing, right? But culturally, from a US perspective, is men's relationships are shoulder to shoulder, not necessarily front to front. And so
Oh
there's so much
yeah.
complexity
Love
to
that.
it, but it's so powerful. And it's, the thing that always, I don't know if it surprises me or if it gives me hope. I don't know what my reaction is to it. But when people experience that true connection and not just surface level and not just, we're fitting into a chart and we're identifying it, but that real, like, we're having a real conversation of just human to human. I mean, I just feel like it goes
Mhm.
back to just human to human. There's always this like, oh, I think I need more of this in my life.
Yeah.
But I don't want to. I want to go back to the point that you were making from the standpoint of, and when you don't fit the norm,
Yeah.
right? And even, some of those assessments will do, and this is not me. I mean, I have my opinions about those assessments, and obviously it's very clear. But like, there's one that, there's the like Big Five,
Hmm.
workplace Big Five, which is a well known and well established, but it'll be like, here's the recipe, if you will, for like
Yeah.
a leader, and it's
Oh,
like, oh
oh,
no, yeah, but that's problematic
that is
because,
so problematic.
you
And then think
know,
about how some organizations use these for hiring. I'm like,
yeah.
how I can't even wrap my brain around it because I will be enraged. Like you cannot use that stuff for hiring. But yeah, yeah.
Okay, and you also, and I want to come back to like language you use, which is like, if you don't fit the pattern or the expectations of standard US white male,
Mhm,
expectations, you use the word suboptimal.
mhm.
And that triggered like that's stuck in my ear a bit of like, it wasn't even just like, oh yeah, and I'm not this, but like I'm actually less than.
I actually am going to say it even more strongly. It's not even that you feel suboptimal. It's that you feel subpar. It's, it's one thing. Suboptimal is like A minus,
Sure.
subpar
Yeah.
is like C minus. And that's what you feel. Sorry, what was your question? I cut
No,
you off before you asked your question.
you're absolutely like, you're answering it and exploring it in the way that it
Yeah.
needs to be explored.
Well, this is an area that I do a lot of my work in because we look at the impacts of bias. You have to address bias from both ends. You have to stop biasing. I just made it into a
Sure.
verb.
Yeah.
Stop actually, directing bias at other people. Stop harming. So organizations have to build in programs and initiatives and policies and procedures and practices that are all about stopping the frickin' harm. But we also have to recognize that many of us have been on the receiving end of harm for a lifetime. And we have to also then, as organizations, provide programs, have our policies, procedures, all that designed to promote healing from that harm, to give back what we took away, right, as a society. And I worry that we tend to see these things as one or the other. I think there was a greater focus societally on the healing from the harm, but it came across more, it wasn't in that language or couched in those terms or even that mindset. It was more like fix yourselves. We're going to
Right.
help you fix
Right.
yourselves. This is
Yeah.
what's wrong with you, marginalized folks. You're not confident enough, right? Like this is where it ties to the imposter syndrome conversation, which is an area we do a lot of work in. You're not confident enough. You're not this enough. You need to be more aggressive. Oh, wait. Oh, Black lady, you're being too aggressive, right? Like all of that kind of something's wrong with you. The problem's not us. The problem is you. We're going to be so nice as to teach you how to fix the problem. And to teach you how to fix the problem, we're going to teach you how to be like us because we're the successful ones and you're subpar. So we're going to bring you up to par by teaching you how to be us. Obviously, that's not going to work because I'm never going to teach you how to be me. You're never going to teach me how to be you, thankfully, right? So I have seen the conversation shift. And I think, Sarah, you and I have been part of that
Mm-hmm.
conversation shifting towards really pointing the finger at the structural root causes of a lot of the struggles that marginalized folks face. This idea that I don't need fixing, it's the system that needs fixing.
Yeah.
And I am all about that. The system is what's broken. We are not broken as humans. And so I do think that we have to actually earnestly start to focus the way we should have many decades ago on fixing the system, because that's the stop the harm part, right? Like
Right.
we can't
Right.
keep putting a band-aid on people and then
Mm.
we just keep injuring them. So we have to stop the harm, we have to fix the system. However, now we've like shifted our focus fully, and now it's like a dirty word to talk about empowering people who are marginalized. I have a problem with that. I do think that, people are harmed and they deserve healing. And so we have to not just do one or the other. We actually have to stop the harm and we have to provide healing from the harm. And when we're providing healing from the harm, we're on the structural end, creating spaces for people to bring more of their true selves instead of
Mm.
trying to squeeze them into these molds that were not created by them or for them. Stop expecting them to check all the boxes and instead allow them to create their own, break those boxes and be who they are. There has to be that safety, but we also have to recognize that for many of us who are marginalized, and I can speak to this, I have been this person, we sometimes have a hard time figuring out who we are because we have
Right.
had to alter ourselves, assimilate to try to get by in life. And so part of the work we get to do for our healing is to start to see those pieces of ourselves we've been cutting off to try to fit into
Mm.
these molds and recognize that those pieces don't make me less than. How I'm different doesn't make me subpar. Actually, what's unique about me might be what makes me the absolute perfect person for this organization, for this opportunity, whatever it might be. But you can't do each of those in a vacuum. You can't say to someone, "Hey, be confident in yourself. You're so awesome. Let's look at what's
Right.
unique about you. Be bold." If there's not a safe space for people to actually be bold and be themselves.
Yeah. And also, there's so much I want to like explore in everything you just shared. I got to get my brain right because there's like eight different paths.
I feel you.
A couple of things just to tease out that, and I, in full disclosure, right? When I first started doing some work outside of sort of my space, I was invited to speak to at women's conferences a lot. And that whole idea of like, well, women aren't as confident. I'll tell you this
Yeah.
story because you'll appreciate it, right? And it's not like we can't just choose to be confident. Like confident comes it's an output, right, of us
Right.
living our values, potentially taking risks, and I mean all these things that we can do to build that. So I had this, like great presentation that people responded to really powerfully. I don't remember what shifted, but I was literally sitting in the hotel the night before. It may have been that I read Ruchika's
Ruchika
article.
Tulshian. Yeah.
Yeah, on stop telling women to be more confident. I can't remember
Stop
if
telling women they have imposter syndrome. I
that's
think
what it
that's the name of
was.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Stop. We
Harvard
will put
Business
that in the
Review.
notes.
Yes.
Yes, we will put it in the notes. I can't remember if that was the moment that I got introduced to this idea or if it was something else, but it made me realize like, oh, I'm causing harm because I'm telling you that you're the one who needs to be fixed instead of the reality is that no, our culture isn't welcoming to confident women. Our culture isn't welcoming to women who are assertive, who are direct, who are are all of that. So I remember calling my husband and being like, "Oh shit, I cannot do this presentation tomorrow. I cannot. I can't." And it was so I ripped everything up and I redid it and was like, let's talk about bias. Let's talk about the impact to it. Let's talk about also the role we play in contributing to that bias. Cause it isn't just right.
I so appreciate you did that because I don't think that it's about we shouldn't talk about it anymore. And that's where I worry the messages the message has become don't talk about it. Imposter syndrome is a dirty word. And like we
Yeah.
can argue about this like what's the right words for it. But yeah, it's not an ideal language for that, but I still think the point of it, people still experience it, right? And
Right.
so it is a real impact of bias. It is a
Yeah.
form of the harm that has been caused. We can be angry about it, which trust me, I am. I am mad at the system. I am mad at all those people that continue to like call me out for owning my value. Like, how arrogant of you, Neha, to talk about what you're doing, right? This is a message that we have in our society. Like, how dare I own my value? I should be
Yeah.
humble. I should be quiet.
Yeah.
I should make
Don't
myself
get too
small.
big for your
Right.
britches.
Don't get
That's
too
what
big
I
for your
get told.
britches.
Like,
But,
just, you know.
the truth is, it has caused injury. So I'm all about get mad, but also like recognize that it's real. Like the messages that have been sent to you that you're not good enough, that's the fiction.
I'm
The
so glad you're
feeling,
going there. Yes.
yeah,
I'm so
the
glad you're going to say,
messages are
okay,
the fiction. The experience of self-doubt that you have, that is not fiction. That is fact. And I worry that when we recognize that the messages are fiction, I worry that some people think that that means that the self-doubt they feel, they shouldn't feel it. There's something wrong with them. And we're finding the experience of imposter syndrome being relegated back to the shadows. And I'm not sure that was the intention. I have no idea what Ruchika Toshian and Jody and Burry, I want to give both of them
Yeah,
props
thank
for the
you.
article. I don't know what their take is on that, but what I see happening is like I literally see people putting on Twitter like, don't bring in an imposter syndrome talk for Women's History Month. And I saw it happen. Like I had tons of talks last year. This year was like crickets. And it worries me because we can't say that the experienced harm isn't real. And we need to continue to provide healing from the harm while also addressing it at a systemic level.
Yeah. I had it as a mental note to because that was one of your posts recently was just so powerfully stated of you being told you're not good enough is fiction. How
Yeah.
you feel as a result of that, that's fact.
Yeah.
And that harm is real. And that's that's the reframe, right? Is that we need to talk about it. And
Yes.
and there's
We need to
so
talk
much
more about it.
we need to talk more about it, and we need to talk more about through the lens of why. I think that has been
Yeah.
an evolution for me on my own journey. It's been an evolution, even Nick and I, we talk about this, right? Of like gender roles and working with people, like working with teams and thinking about it through an why is my brain glitching right now? The
Intersectional? No.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the word that I know.
We're
And
so
I was just writing
connected.
about it. It's thank you. No, we get 10 points for that. Okay,
yeah.
but no, but yeah, the intersectionality of race, of your immigrant status, of your
Yeah.
language, all of that. And they're realizing that so much of the doubt comes from the fact that you don't fit the norm
Exactly.
was so profound. It's still like it gives me goosebumps and it makes me so sangry. I'm sad and angry, right?
Oh,
Like
I love that. I don't love
like
that. I don't love that
I
you
don't love that, but like right?
I love the term.
But you're right. The cost is real.
Yeah.
And it's not as simple as just like, we'll reclaim, like it is a process because you literally can, I'll speak from my own experience. Like every time I get clear about who I am, every time I own and go, I know that's what you want me to do, but this is what I'm going to do and how I'm going to show up. Every step we're hitting up against this. It's like a container
Yes.
we're in, right? We're hitting up against it. And I hadn't thought about that before until we're talking about this right now. But that reframe of, because I actually know quite a few companies bigger global companies that they spend a lot of time trying to normalize imposter syndrome and like, hey, like it's normal. But it is so often through the lens of there's something wrong with you instead of, no, the system is telling you there's something wrong with you. And I just want to reiterate that point that you make so powerfully of healing.
Yeah. It's healing. And I mean, I think about this even kind of coming full circle to our first interaction. Sarah, I was not the person 10, 15 years ago who would have replied to your tweet and shared my perspective. Because 10, 15 years ago, I was struggling a lot more with imposter syndrome. Which makes you question your own judgment. I would have had this feeling like something's sitting wrong with me about what that person tweeted. There's something that's off, but I must be just misunderstanding. Let me just, I'm not,
It must be
they're
me.
experts.
It must
I'm
be
not an
me.
expert. It must be me.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, right? Who am I to question that person? That's the voice of self-doubt, right? Call it what you want. Call it imposter syndrome, call it self-doubt, call it internalized bias, which it's all of those things to me. I wouldn't have spoken up. And if I hadn't spoken up, I did not have the confidence to speak up. I did not have the confidence in my voice, in my perspective. By busting through my self-doubt, I developed that confidence, which has allowed me to make a comment like that to you, which allowed me to find you, my soul sister in ways,
Well,
right?
me to find you.
And I can't imagine all the times I've missed that. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to instead treasure the many connections that have fed my soul, that come out of me having the confidence to amplify my voice. And what I realized once I started to disrupt my self-doubt is that I shake up the system in all sorts of ways. I'm a much better ally and advocate. When I see something happen, when I see someone direct bias against someone else, I don't do what I used to do with great shame now, right? Looking back, like, oh my gosh, wait, did that really happen? Did that person really say that to that person? Should I, oh gosh, should I say something? Oh no, what if then they direct something at me? And I just miss that opportunity to do what's right. Now I don't miss that opportunity because I trust my judgment and I have the confidence in my voice and my perspective and my skills to speak up. So when we are actually cultivating evidence-based confidence in individuals, regardless of whether they're marginalized, multiply marginalized or not, we're actually empowering people to be a part of disrupting this, shaking up the system. So I see the ripple effects of that.
That boy, Neha. I don't even know what to. My brain is like, it hurts because it's working so hard. I mean, like seeing the interconnectedness between, hey, when we do this work on an individual level, it actually helps us to also do the work on the systemic level.
Exactly.
And I want to go, I really appreciated your language of, I'm going to disrupt my self-doubt. Like I'm going to interrupt it. And I just, that was really resonating for me. And, one of the things that I've learned on my journey of, truly of just even like trying to reclaim, and I say this from a place of privilege. Like I'm a white woman in Midwest. So I am not only am I the dominant on multiple levels, but like within my geographic location. And I am still working on reclaiming who am I though? Like, how do I want to show up? And, and even through the lens of like, as simple as making choices for the company or whatever, like, I think I should do this, but I really want this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned and I've continued to learn and I try to stay connected to it, to anchor me in those moments that are hard, where you are just like, ooh, should I, shouldn't I? Or it's just like when we get when we get clarity, that leads to conviction. And when we have that conviction, it gives us the courage. And
Whoa. Can you say that again slow for me? Because I need to
like
marinate in that.
When we have clarity around what's important to us, it gives us a stronger sense of conviction. And when we have that conviction, it gives us the courage to say no.
Yeah.
Which you just shared an article, about how, women need to say no more. And it was like, no, we say no plenty. We're just not received.
Exactly.
That's a conversation perhaps for another
Dr.
day.
Aaron Reeves, I think, wrote that article. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but it gives us that courage. And it is, boy, it's an endurance game, but it does feel like every moment when you step into and own that, like, nope, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to show up. I don't know if it's like, I don't know what the right image is. It's not like it's not a sculptor chipping away, but maybe it is. Like if we're putting these blocks and it's like slowly revealing like who we are, or shedding. I mean, there's like a shedding of, a theme that comes up a lot in these conversations are, right, the masks we wear and the
Yeah, yeah.
costumes and all of that. But it does give you that courage. And for
I
me,
love that.
that's where the confidence comes in. But it's
Yeah.
so, no, go ahead. Yeah.
No, please, please. I'm holding on to my thought. Please go
Well,
ahead.
but and somebody once, well, I've been told a lot, like, you're so authentic, and I said, part of me being able to step into my authenticity is I've been rewarded for my authenticity.
Yes.
Like building my company, I have been rewarded. People have acknowledged it. I
Yeah.
have reaped benefits from it. If I'm in a culture where I'm not rewarded for my authenticity, it's not going to shine brighter. It's
That's
going to go
right.
dimmer, So
And
I'd
there
love to
are
hear your
spaces
thoughts.
I'm sure you've experienced where you haven't been as welcomed
Oh,
to be your authentic
100%.
self, right? It's interesting because it's coming back even more to that point I was thinking about making, which was that revealing, that word you used about kind of chipping away and revealing. What I found since I started my business, and really mostly through my writing, is that whether it's like actually writing an essay and publishing it, or it's even like posting on LinkedIn or other social media, that sometimes the thing that is the scariest to say, that I feel the most vulnerable saying, is that reveal. And when people can see more of who I am, they actually recognize that. They recognize that part of me that is also part of them. And they feel so relieved. I'm thinking about around when I started my business, I wrote this personal essay called, oh gosh, now I've forgotten the name of it. Growing up brown in America when every day is Halloween. I think that's what it's called. And it was deeply personal. It was about covering. It had the metaphor of costume. It expressed a lot of stories of my experience growing up, being bullied racially, and how I dealt with it in the legal profession and the barriers I faced. And it was a scary thing to even acknowledge for myself. It was like, it just kind of came out of me and I was like, holy crap, I didn't realize what I'd been through. And then I put it out into the world. And I kind of had a sense that this is a well-written piece. I was like, oh God, you got this one, Neha. But I did not realize how it would personally impact people. Like I had people contacting me, random strangers. Neha, I am sobbing as I read this. Oh my gosh, this, like, I relate so much to it. Like those courageous, what felt like courage to me at the time, those courageous reveals, those chipping away, in some circumstances, people will recognize you better and they will recognize themselves in you. And I've built relationships based on that essay. My business, if I trace back, like, oh, this person heard of me through that. That person hired me through that. That person actually found me through that personal essay about every day is Halloween. Like so much of my work currently in the success of my business is rooted in that moment of reveal. And I'm not saying that it's always paid off, because as the essay states, it's actually burned me a lot of times to reveal. But I think there's some strategy we can employ about how and where we express ourselves and push ourselves to do it. Because by writing that, and I've had the same thing happen to me where other people have written something, and I'm like, oh, I see myself in this. It was the unspoken thing. And oh my gosh, and it fires me up. And I'm like, yes, I deserve better. And I become that champion, right? And so we can fire one another up in that way without realizing that we're having that impact, I think.
Yeah, I people recognize you better. That damn near gets me misty thinking about it.
Me too.
Because
I mean,
it's
yeah.
like, and from the standpoint of, it's like walking around in a fog that's not clear. Like the vision of us isn't clear, but when people see you better, it's clear. And also, and also there's some clarity around who you're right for and who you're not, and who are your people and who aren't you, right? I mean, I know that, as a fellow
Yeah.
business owner, you're not for everyone. We're not for everyone.
Yep.
But the clearer people can see me, the clearer, right, that they can, but also that, almost like, I don't want to use the word giving permission, but a little bit of like, I know for me, there are times when it's like, oh, because you took that step of courage, because you
Yes.
own that, it like gives me permission, or it makes it feel safer for me to take that risk, to say, oh, me too, or I hadn't thought about it, or to share it. And so there's something so powerful.
Oh, I'm silently clapping because I take that very seriously. Like that is actually a driving motivator for me. This idea of what am I modeling, right? Like what boxes am I breaking? And how am I, by breaking these boxes, creating a path for the people that come after us to be more of who they are? So, for example, with self promotion, and because I kind of tease that a little bit, this idea of let me tell you about how awesome I am. Let me post on LinkedIn about this program I did that I feel really good about. Or let me just say, hey, I'm a really great public speaker, and that is something that really makes people uncomfortable because women are not supposed to say they're great at something. And certainly, like, brown women are not supposed to say they're great at something. And I get a lot of flack for it. But I am in a position of privilege. Like if I had done that 15 years ago, first of all, I wouldn't have been able to say that I was a very effective public speaker because I had massive imposter syndrome about it. But if I had said anything about what I was good at back then, the price would have been bigger for me to pay. If I were a Black woman, a Black queer woman, the price is bigger for me to pay, right? And so I recognize my privilege, but I also recognize that I can afford to take the risk now. I can afford to lose more people and still sustain a business. So I damn well better take that risk to bust those, like break those boxes and build new models of what it means to be a brown woman for people to understand and normalize that, guess what? Brown women can be experts and say they're experts at X, Y, or Z. That's normal. So I really appreciate that point. And I think that I do hold us all accountable to use our privilege in those ways to kind of break those boxes.
I'm just like that question of what am I modeling, and
Yeah.
and where else could there be bigger risks? That's what's coming up for me personally. It's just like where can I take bigger risks because I can afford to,
Because
right?
I
Like
can
I'm in a
afford to.
place where
Yeah.
it's like because I can afford to, and what does that look like when you are working with an individual or you're working with a group? Because I imagine there are people who are listening to this right now going, "Holy shit!" Like I
Just
hadn't
like
thought
you and
about
I are
it.
going, holy
Just
shit,
like,
because
yeah,
I'm feeling that
I
way
mean,
too.
like we're doing that too. But because I know that anytime when I talk about the idea of imposter syndrome now, and I go, well, so let's pause a second. So let's name what is actually causing the doubt, because the doubt isn't because you're terrible.
Yeah.
The doubt is because who you are isn't what's expected or accepted.
And because people have told you you're
Because
terrible.
right.
It's not your voice. It's the voice of other people that has
Yeah.
infiltrated your brain.
Those saboteur voices, yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I've positioned that, like, yeah, it's the doubt comes because you're different than the norm. You're different, and then people are just like, what? Like I never thought
Yeah.
about that. So for people who are listening, who are going, wow, where can I start my healing?
Yeah.
Like the system needs to change. And now I understand that it's not that I'm broken, but I understand that the harm and the hurt is very real. Where would you point people to start that journey of healing?
I think there's so many different tools and tactics. So you're like having me try to choose a
I
favorite
know,
pet or a
like,
favorite child.
yeah.
Yeah. But I will say, I think one of the easier ones that you can create into a habit, and we know habits are really the key, is creating a to-do list, reserving time and I'm really looking at empowering the individual at this point, right? Like the healing from the harm. And I will give another tip on the kind of leader
Thank you. I was
structural
going to ask
side.
about that.
Yes, because I think you got to do both. You got to do both. So one, for the individual, we are not, many of us who are marginalized in a lot of different ways are not allowed to, and even in our capitalist society, I think, are not allowed to sit with our accomplishments. We're striving. We're always on to the next thing, right? Did that, move on. What's next, right? That is part of the problem. That is why when we face a situation that feels new to us, we think we are not qualified for it. We feel unqualified because we haven't marinated in our past successes or been thoughtful and intentional about connecting the dots between our skill sets and our perspectives, are recipes for success from those past successes that actually are transferable into this quote unquote new area. So we have to build better habits, pushing back. It takes pushback on society because society does not want you to do this, especially if you're a woman, for example, or melanated, for example, right? Like it does not want you to sit with your accomplishments and own them. So you got to be bold and do it. And so one kind of habitual way to do that is I'm going to make this super easy. Like reserve 10 minutes every Friday afternoon and ask yourself, what is one ta-da from this week? What is one thing I have accomplished this week? Don't look at your to-do list and find a ta-da from there, because often our greatest ta-das are things that came out of nowhere and were never on our to-do list. Put that to-do list away. Just blank sheet of paper, blank Word document, whatever, in the cloud, in your notes, whatever. What is one ta-da that you're proud of? It can be personal. It can be professional. It can be tiny. It can be something you were lauded for, something no one else noticed. Just one ta-da. You can't stop there though, because the gold is really what comes next, which is what were your unique skills, perspectives, and experiences that led to that ta-da? That's how you start to build a bank of your unique qualifications. And when you have those moments of self-doubt, one, you will have less moments of self-doubt because you will just naturally feel more qualified. But, we never get rid of self-doubt. So in those moments where self-doubt creeps in, you go back to your bank and you're like, let me look at all my unique qualifications. Oh, actually, if I could leverage this in this situation. I may feel unqualified in this situation, but look, I'm actually uniquely qualified in this situation. I didn't take the path well traveled. I don't fit that mold, but I'm going to come at this from my unique way. And that's how the magic happens. So I think, I've kind of really distilled it and simplified it, but I think literally just a ta-da list and asking yourself, what about me led to that ta-da, building a habit of that, you're naturally going to start to see your self-doubt be mitigated. And then on the kind of structural level,
hold on. Let's pause on there because we got time. We'll get to the structural in a moment. I've never made the connection between doubt and striving, the capitalistic striving. Yeah. And I'm sure Nick is listening to this. Like, I'm thinking about a conversation you and I had on Tuesday night, Sarah, when your doubt was real, big. And he asked me, he said, how often do you actually listen and pay attention to the good feedback? Yeah. And I made the comment, and it made me really heartbroken to say it out loud. I said, I feel like recently I've just become numb to it because I'm just constantly like, what's next? Or what do we need to move? You know what I mean? And it's not that it's not because I take it for granted. It's not because I go, oh yeah, of course, that's not it. But I'm not slowing down enough to actually go, we should celebrate that. That was big. And I hadn't made the connection of just that like culture of striving and constantly doing better and constantly. And, we even had a moment as the team, we were on a call with a potential client and, I was having a low, right? I mean, I'm human. Like this has just been it's been a tender week for my doubt's been high. And, we're talking and halfway through she goes, I'm sorry, like, are you hiring? I would literally come and just sweep the floors to just be part of it. Part of what you all are doing and part of your conversations. And it was so sweet and it was so easy to be like, oh no, that's like, actually we might be posting or, whatever, but thank you. And then it was like, as soon as we got off the call, it was, okay, what do we need to do? And da-da-da-da-da. And like, we went into task mode and I was just like, can we just celebrate for a second that moment? Like, because we don't. And you're right that like, it becomes such an important anchor of getting us through the doubt because we can't remove it, right? But we can hopefully like quiet it and get through it faster. I feel like that's always my goal is how can I get through it faster and not have it pull me down. So I just wanted to pause on that because I just, when you talked about striving, I was like, oh God, she's talking about me right now. Like this is feeling very real for me.
What's so interesting is the seminal study on imposter syndrome done by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes was about imposter syndrome and high achieving women. There is a connection between high achievement and imposter syndrome, which seems like that that's ironic. Like what?
Right. Right.
But you can see it, right? We high achievers set our own bars so dang high, and we surround ourselves with a bunch of high achievers that, it's hard. We're human. We can't keep meeting that bar. And then we feel subpar when we
Yeah.
don't bring our A+ game to everything because we're human and we can't. And also, our success, like our outcomes in life, are not just a result of what we bring to the situation. It's a combination of what we bring to the situation and a bunch of things that are outside of our control. And we
Yeah.
forget about that piece of it. And then the other thing I was thinking about with accomplishment is we high achievers, right, are like constantly striving. That is
Yeah.
what has led to achievement.
Right. Like
So
that.
you see that connection there with
Yeah.
how it feeds our imposter syndrome. And I just want to suggest things if you weren't already doing this, because you so vulnerably shared that example. You just shared a ta-da. So I would ask you to dig deeper on why do you think that person, you could do this with compliments, right? Like that was a compliment, that you received that as a compliment, what that person said. Why do you think that person feels that way? What is it about you, not your team? There are probably things about your team you can
Yeah,
say.
I'm so uncomfortable right now.
I
And
know,
like, and
right?
I'm always just, like, oh no, like accept the compliment. And
Yeah.
and all the juices are coming up in my body of like, oh,
Yep.
okay, she's gonna make you answer it, and you should, and I will.
Yeah, I'm going to
But
make you answer. And you're right. Like you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you in feeling that discomfort, because you have been told by society
yeah.
not to ever be humble, be humble, be humble, be humble, be humble. So there's that cognitive dissonance, right? And so, yes, but we have to fight that. So can you tell me one
fighting
thing?
it right now.
Yeah, one thing about you that you think led to that person expressing what they did to you.
Given the context, I think that I think that what creates a space for something, for somebody to, in that moment, was being very human and
Yeah.
having a ton of humility, also having deep care, acknowledging her struggles in a very real way.
Yeah.
She's in a tough spot, and just sitting with her in that tough spot and not trying to fix it. We've developed a lot of, when I say we, my colleagues and I, we have such a deep respect for each other and trust that it's not uncommon that people are like, I just want to be friends with you all, because we care. I mean, we care deeply. It's not about the sale. Like the sale will come if it's the right, but
Right.
I can tell that I'm intellectualizing my response right now, Neha.
No, you're doing it. I mean, I think you're doing a fantastic job. You named like probably 6 things that you need to put into your bank of unique qualifications. And you brought up the term we, which I love because it indicates that there are other people who deserve credit, but you didn't say they, which I think a lot of people will say because it's more comfortable to be like, oh, well, my team does blah,
sure.
blah, 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 right? You have to recognize that you are a part of that. And by saying we, that was awesome that you were able to be like, I'm a part of it. So my suggestion, and this actually gets to the structural aspect, you can actually make this part of the structure, is that you build, well, first of all, one-on-one, we can build this in because I feel the same way as an entrepreneur. We do not have people to celebrate our wins with so much. And we're leading companies. So we're just go, 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 go. When you and I have our walk and talks, we need to make time to each share a ta-da and celebrate that. Right? So let's build that in on a one-on-one basis. And then for your team, like what would it look like to, I don't know if you have a periodic meeting with the team, but maybe even just one person each time share a ta-da. So you're not taking up the whole time, but everyone gets a chance meeting after meeting, like, within X number of meetings, everyone's gotten a chance. But that's how you weave something into a system, right? It becomes part of the norm by creating that. And you're going to hear from people things that you didn't even realize were their skill set, because they're going to be like, this ta-da happened. And what does that indicate about who I am and what I'm capable? I'm blah, 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 blah. I'm a really effective communicator. When I was in high school, blah, blah, blah happened. And this is how I dealt with it. And you're going to learn things about your coworkers that are going to blow your mind. And you are then going to be that box is, that mold is being broken, right? You're like, wow, you're surprising me. And that element of surprise and creating that safe space for surprise is what the structural aspect is about.
Yeah. I, I, that's such a gift that you've given, because I think that I've been a part of teams and we work to identify our celebrations. I think that that's something that I, give huge props to Amy and Teresa, and I try to catch it myself. It's easier for me to catch it when I'm with them than it is by myself,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
like that's the push for me. And to realize, like, oh, and it's uncomfortable because literally in my DNA is you don't get too big for your britches.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you
Oh
need to
yeah.
stay humble, and that's something that's still a journey. I mean, I had a client who was like, I know we hired you for a keynote, but like, how do you feel just ad-libbing? And I just took a moment. I go, I am at my best. I am literally at my best, without a doubt, in the moment following the learning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I said, without question. And she said, I
Love
kind of
it.
thought. And like, but Sarah 10 years ago, sure as hell wouldn't have said
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
But
it's
I love
beautiful.
that practice of who am I, and what was I capable? Like, what did I do that contributed to it? And even the language of like, what are your unique skills and perspectives and experiences that brought? And I think that sometimes I am just speaking from experience, that's the piece that's missing. But that's where we start to build a new
Mhm.
foundation. That's where we start breaking those. And I think that's such a powerful practice. It's such a gift.
And
Thank
I
you.
think it's important to not just do it about what skills, because we define
Yeah.
ourselves based on our output and our
Yeah.
skills, quote unquote. But what about our experiences? Our experiences matter. Our marginalization matters. Our perspectives matter. All of those are part of that recipe for success. And I don't think that we have, as a society, seen that as broadly and valued one another and ourselves in that more broader way. We tend to value ourselves. Again, this is going to be like a dump on capitalism, but like value
Yeah.
ourselves based on our output and our skills, but our lives that we've lived offer so much richness to what we're able to contribute in this world.
Yeah, that's just the mic drop right there. I mean, yeah. And how, God, yeah. We need to have you back, and we need to explore all of this and more. Neha, well, I'll love on you here in a minute, but this has been such a rich, an even richer conversation than I think. I mean, I was so looking forward to this conversation with you, but I'm sitting with this like physical feeling of deep expansiveness in my chest and my heart right now, of just like, what did we just create space? Like, I feel like
Yes.
this conversation created space for something to be welcomed in again. We always ask our guest a final question. So I'm curious to offer this up to you. And that is, what is a conversation that you've had with yourself or with someone else that was transformative?
I think we already hit it. It was that, there have been many, but we talked about the conversation you and I had over Twitter. And for me, much of the impact that I feel emotional, honestly, even talking about this. For me, a lot of the impact was, I literally might start crying, was giving me hope in a time that felt very dark. We've lived through, these are heavy times. These are heavy, heavy times. And working as a woman of color in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it has been taxing in a different way over these past 2 years. It often feels like walking a minefield, and we're constantly reminded of how little power we have. And that is triggering, right, to us, and deeply injurious. And our interaction and how you welcomed my perspective gave me hope and reminded me that I'm not always going to be shut down, right? That it's worth taking the chance of finding my voice and amplifying it, because there are people out there who want to hear it and will not just hear it, but will offer back their perspective and share themselves with me, reveal themselves to me, in a way that I find this, amazing community that sustains my hope. So I am deeply grateful to you, Sarah. I'm deeply grateful to you. I'm deeply grateful to us and how we handled that conversation.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm just gonna sit here with my tears and my gratitude and my heart pounding out of my chest love for you and appreciation, and it's worth, I think, saying and reminding that moment of courage fundamentally changed me and changed us, and also has continued to have a huge ripple effect, because it triggered a conversation in my husband and I afterwards about how, one, the bar is so low for us white people, and how we continue to benefit even when we're trying to do the right stuff, and the continued ripple, and also the continued deepening is, it's not just but it's also like a deepening, and I can feel it even just in talking this out loud of, as somebody who's continuing to work on being more courageous myself in those moments and using my power differently and just all of that. And I'm not not flippant. That's not the word I want to say. Like, I simply adore you and I love you so much. Like, I have such deep respect and admiration for you. And I don't say that lightly. And literally we're here because of you. So thank you.
Oh, Sarah, I am feeling it. I am believing it. I'm so grateful for that. And I also am sending that back to you. I'm so grateful. The ripple effects, you just mentioned some of them. Like, I could probably mention like a bazillion more that I see. And I think there are so many we don't see yet of that conversation. How is that gonna, like, it's changed my life because I know you now. And I wouldn't have even, like, I have your book. I get to benefit from your book. Like, there's just so many ripple effects just to be able to kind of root back in that conversation. Deeply appreciate you. I love you. I love your work. And yeah, we're making it happen. Let's keep making it happen.
I love it. Thank you, Neha. Our guest this week has been Neha Sampat. There's a number of things I'm taking away. One that I circled, I've starred, is this idea of the assumption of caring that anchored our conversation, and that question of what am I role modeling right now? And so I'd love to hear what resonated for you. So send us a message at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com. We want to hear from you. So what resonated? What are you curious about? What is your ta-da? Please share with us. Also, my DMs are always open on social media. And if you'd like to find out more about our work and how we can help you or your team have conversations that matter, check us out at sarahnollwilson.com. You can also pick up a copy of my latest book, Don't Feed the Elephants, wherever books are sold. And if you'd like to support the show, please consider becoming a patron. You can visit patreon.com/conversationsonconversations, where not only your financial support will sustain this podcast and our amazing team that makes it possible, but you'll also get access to some pretty great benefits like swag and Patreon-only content and events. And if you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can do so on iTunes, Spotify, or other podcast platforms. This helps us get the word out and continue to bring on amazing guests each week. Thank you to our incredible team who makes this podcast possible. To our producer, Nick Wilson, sound editor, Drew Noll, transcriptionist, Olivia Reinert, and marketing consultant, Caitlin Summit Nelson. And a wholehearted, deep breath thank you to our guest, Neha Sampat. She's incredible. I know that I am leaving our conversation different, and I hope that you are as well. This has been Conversations on Conversations. Thank you so much for listening, and remember that when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. So take care, please make sure you rest and rehydrate, and we'll see you again next week.